Greetings, YouTube. I've had a number of posters ask me to talk about an old Gamma World campaign that I ran years and years ago, back in the 90s. Now, I didn't write any notes for this. This may be a little rambly, and I know I'm going to have to do this in multiple parts because it was a long campaign. I came up with a lot of information, and eventually I will be talking about some specific files I created for this, so like text files with information, which I will make freely available to anyone who emails me and wants them. They're all text-based, so they're really small files, so it's not a big burden. This was based on the 3rd edition of the Gamma World game. Now, Gamma World is a post-apocalyptic role-playing game that kind of on a wild and wacky side. It's far more science fantasy than science fiction. At its best, it could be considered soft science fiction. It is not hard science fiction by any way, shape, or means. This particular edition, it was a percentile dice-based system that used a color chart, the action table, ACT. You might recognize this from, this was very similar to the chart that was used on a Marvel Heroes game put out by TSR at one time, which I also own. And this is the chart is slightly different, but it's a very similar design. And this chart was set up so you notice the colors on it. And for example, combat results would go from like red, which is avoided, all the way down to black, which is knockout. That's all for like slam. Then you had like difficulty factors: challenging, difficult, average, fast, fair, easy, automatic, and just bad break. If you get a black, black is something you want to avoid. They had different columns that go from A through ABC, then it goes 1 through 21, then XYZ, and then you go have the results, which is goes from in brackets, 10, 20, 30, things like that. And you're over here, it's really hard to do things up here. If you're high level, it's really easy to do things up in this zone. Okay, still not easy to get that way up there. It's still not easy to do that, even at highest levels. I like this system because it was percentile based. First of all, I got to use my magic percentile dice, which my players came to hate. But it also meant that it was fairly easy to convert material from other games because it was easy to convert those things into percentiles and then use it in this. And I used the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles setting after the bomb. This is the 1st edition of that setting extensively. When I say used it, I lifted entire parts of that game out of it and dumped it into my Gamma World campaign. I did countries, organizations, gangs, and they used the rules for creating mutant animals in this for my Gamma World campaign in this version. I wish I had access to the After the Bomb 2nd edition, which is a far superior game. Highly recommended. So I wanted to have an unusual post-apocalyptic setting because normally they're set right here in America. Okay, the favorite thing to do is you set them in your town. That way your players can get to root through the ruins of where they currently live, which is cool. But it also means they're going to be prepared for many things. Even if it's set in the future, there are going to be certain things that are not going to change, geographic structures and features and things like that. So I wanted to have the post-apocalyptic feeling and that vibe without the preconceptions that come with basing it in an area that the player could go and look up a map and have a rough idea where they were from just a general description. So I decided I would set my campaign on an alien planet. So now, a lot of the things I'm about to talk about I never really worked out exactly what time scale they were. Very roughly worked them out. If you've listened to the Justifiers timeline I talked about, a lot of the things from that timeline are very close to what I used in the Gamma World campaign. So basically, in the 21st century, man expanded into our solar system. Moon, Mars, L5 orbital station, numerous outpost research mining colonies all over our system. In the 22nd century, someone discovered something as the jump gates. The jump gates allowed a ship to go between point A and point B without traveling between the intermittent space in between. It was an instantaneous wormhole. It avoided the problem of having to create a permanent wormhole, which is very power wasteful, and it just created it for that moment you needed it to get from point A to point B. And the only place to create them effectively is within a very powerful magnetic field, and the best place they discovered was the poles of the sun. So you have the North Pole of the sun and the South Pole of the sun. They set up two gates, and the North Pole of the sun would be an outgoing gate, and the South Pole of the sun would be an incoming gate, and that way you avoided traffic jams. Now they discovered that the gates only functioned to certain other stars. It's like one star, our star, only had connections to one other star. We were essentially on the back end of the universe, which explains, at least in my gaming background, why we had never been discovered by aliens before. Because we were in the middle of nowhere. We were the Hicks of the solar system, of the galaxy. But we did find a gate that led to another system, and that system was linked to like 2 or 3 other stars. And then we hit Pater, because one of those stars was linked to like 9 different stars. And that became the hub of the new Terran Empire. Earth became kind of a very lazy backwater place, which is what it is now, on a galactic scale. And man just spread out everywhere. And one of the systems they moved to was Tau. The Tau system had an unusual double planet that was in the habitable zone. They orbited a point between them, and one of them was about the same size as Earth. It was a smidge smaller. But it was tied to another planet, which was almost the size of Mars, just big enough to hold an atmosphere. And they orbited around each other, around a point, and that point was what was in the orbit around the sun. Now, while they could hold atmospheres, they didn't. They were the right size, but they were barren. A very wealthy military industrialist basically bought the rights, because he had lots of pull, and decided he was going to turn these into his own personal preserves. One, he turned into a pleasure planet to make a lot of money, and that was the planet that the game took place on. But the smaller of the planets, he named Seraph, and I don't remember why I picked Seraph. I have no clue. And he decided to turn that into a Jurassic Park, where they had re-engineered dinosaurs, and he was going to make this as their planet, which he would then saturate with 3D cameras and make it a live action, make it a live reality TV kind of thing. You know, holograms in your living room showing you dinosaurs on a day-to-day basis. He also used it as a place to hide a military base that no one could get to because the entire planet was quarantined and you couldn't land on it. Now, things rolled along quite nicely. The planet became a resort. The planet was called Tau. And he made lots of money. Everybody was happy. There was a light security contingent on the planet, but there was a powerful orbital facility in the center between the 2 planets rotated. Actually, their L5 point between the 2 of them, essentially, a Lagrange point. And everything was just ducky until aliens discovered us. Now, the aliens were a little more advanced than us in their jump technology. They still needed to use jump gates, but they could pick the planets they went to, the systems they went to, much more readily than we could. We were kind of stuck on that railroad. We could only go to where the jump gate would go because of whatever the frequencies or however it functioned. I never filled in the details on that. But they could get much better at this. But they saw humans as a threat, because they know if we've got this technology today, humans are going to figure it out eventually, which means our empire, our home world, is going to be at danger. So, let's squash these human vermin while we have the chance. And thus began the first and only interstellar war. The aliens did a very much like the Japanese did to the United States in World War II. They figured we'll make a big decisive strike, we'll crush their will, they'll go home, everybody's happy. It didn't work that way. We fought tenaciously. In fact, we fought so tenaciously that we really began to make them nervous that we were going to find their home world before they could stop us, because we were really desperately trying to find it. So, in a last-ditch effort to prevent this from happening, the aliens activated a device. And this device disrupted the gate system. They pushed a button, and they just scrambled every gate structure within billions of light years. Suddenly, none of the gates worked. nobody could get anywhere. Which stranded a whole lot of military units of the aliens in a whole lot of places. And they decided, well, if we can't get home, we're going to make darn well sure that the humans don't have any either. And so they went on a scorched earth policy. And the one unit was stuck in the Tau system. And they took a bunch of asteroids, put drive units on them, and launched them at the 2 habitable worlds and the military installation that orbited between them. And they were very successful at this. Not only did they have these rocks, these stupid missiles, essentially, Thor's hammers, I believe is what they might be called, but they also had some biological agents strapped to them as well as a 1-2 punch. It wiped out all the major structures on Tau, just incinerated them, creating a bunch of round lakes and seas in their wake. The military bases were all gone. When all was said and done, the aliens won. It was somewhat of a Pyrrhic victory because when they were finished, there were very few of them left alive, and the commander had, the person that was in command of the alien that was in command of the unit, had his fill of it. He was done. He took his survivors, went to Tau, landed in an out of the way place, and decided, we're just going to live our lives here because we're stuck. And they blended in with the community, essentially, though they were isolated for a long time, because the world was ravaged by biological agents, chemical weapons that the humans had used. It was just a mess. And out of this grew a post-apocalyptic setting. The most common races on the entire world were animals. Animals comprised about 95% of the PCs and NPCs in this campaign. Of the remaining 5%, about 4% of them were mutant humans. And of the remaining 1%, it was pretty much an even split between sentient plants and pure strain humans. Now, I stole things from the Gamma World Cryptic Alliances and from TMNTs after the bomb, kind of fused them together, used like the pure strain humans were the Knights of Genetic Purity, there was I think there was something like the Dolphin Confederation, and there was the good guys had the free range, and that was based in this place called the New Tau. Now, New Tau was a prosperous, growing place. It was where it was a constitutional democracy. It was a place that people had a vote, you had a say, you had freedom of expression, things like that. And it's where the PCs eventually moved to, and that was the nexus, the heart of the campaign was there. Though they ranged all over the planet over the course of the campaign. And eventually they actually made their way all the way to their co-planet Seraph. Now, one of the things I threw in there, and I did this mostly for myself, because no one in the group ever actually figured it out. Some of you might be familiar with the Horse Clan series, a post-apocalyptic series of novels. They're written by a guy named Robert Adams. Now, Robert Adams wrote these stories, and in the stories, some of the main characters are immortals. They're mutant humans that they don't age, and they have an incredibly high rate of regeneration, like more powerful than Wolverines, okay? It's almost impossible to kill these people. Well, I decided that Robert Adams himself was an immortal. And he survived far into the future and had been on this planet enjoying his vast wealth that he had accumulated over the centuries, sunning himself when the war broke out. And he saw a need to help bring something out of the ashes of this world. So with the use of some clever robotics, he passed himself off as a mutant human and established the nation of the Free Range, being its first president. And after a long and successful career, by a couple of terms as president, and establishing himself as a spokesman, and really getting the nation headed up on a right foot, being their George Washington, he quote-unquote died, stripped himself of the robotics he had used to make himself appear to be a mutant human, and went on his business. Eventually, he re-entered the campaign during the actual time while my players were running this, as a character known as Otto, who owned Otto's Oddities, which is a shop I've used multiple times in different campaigns. It's a place where you can buy weird things and sell weird things to a guy who has seen it all and is never going to bat an eye, no matter what you bring to him or what you request. So these are some basic concepts here. I will probably cover some of the more NPCs and details. Now, I ran this campaign for over 3 years, and it was pretty much the long 3.5 years, I think it was, and I think it was the longest non-D&D campaign I ever ran. Ironically, I started it out as an experiment, as practice, so I could run a Justifiers campaign, and Justifiers campaign never happened because this one ran so long. And by the time the campaign ended on a climax, though not the ultimate climax that I had planned, none of the people who were in that campaign had been in the original group. They'd all cycled through over time. And it was very organic over that time. We had some great players, we had some not so great players. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed myself. It flat out, the memories I had from that campaign were some of the strongest I have in gaming. My fondest gaming memories were in that campaign. Some wonderful moments, some connections with players on a personal and on a gaming level, where sometimes you just click with somebody, and things just come together perfectly in that moment, and you create gaming magic. And a couple of those things, actually more than a couple of those things, happened in that campaign. It was a lot of fun. So, like I said, I'll probably go into more detail with other things in the future, and if people have specific questions about this, like what do you want to see, I know I plan on covering some of the organizations that were in the group, in the game, religious groups, businesses, adventuring and mercenary groups, things like that. I may even cover some of the house rules I came up with for the 3rd edition game. And a couple of I think I have access to stats for a couple of the player characters, and I know that I have some quick thumbnail sketches about some of the non-player characters, such as the Robert Adams / Otto that I mentioned earlier. But if you are familiar with Gamma World and the TMNT After the Bomb, you'll have an idea of the kind of game I had. It was very much almost Marvel superheroes in structure. Because in the real world, you get mutations through radiation or a mutagen or something, you die. If you're lucky, you end up with horrible cancer. Your offspring are not born superheroes or super mutants. They're born horribly deformed, and they're most likely going to die before they are 1 year old. So the fact that you end up with superpowers is very much science fantasy. And we actually had some NPCs in the game who thought they were superheroes, for real. And again, I'll probably mention those in the future videos. So I hope that you have enjoyed this basic introduction to the Gamma World campaign I was mentioning. The adventuring group in question eventually came to be known as Overkill Incorporated. And that is how I always referred to that campaign. It was the Overkill campaign. And that's how I will be referring to it in today's video and in any future videos that deal with that campaign.